Yes, please believe it, we are finally here. The long awaited How Herc Becomes Alcides. It's about to be a movie. We will be covering the story of Herc and his master all the way up until volume 8. That's where we're at in the story as of today. We start things off on the outskirts of Snowfield City in the industrial area. You got a bunch of factories in this district, and in between these buildings you have this huge meat processing plant. You get down to the bottom of the plant and there's a workshop. The workshop being surrounded by all these layers of bounded fields. The area of the workshop itself being described to be even larger than the lot up above. All of these factories, everything that's in the industrial district, all of these buildings belong to a single family, the Scladio family. And who is this family exactly? None other than the Mafia, that's ran by Galvaroso Scladio. He made his way up to the top in the underworld because of how clever he was. So yes, for all the people who have been asking, yes, you've been missing out. The Mafia is in fate. It's been a thing. But the way they operate is a bit different. While the Scladios did have ties to the Sicilian Mafia, the way they operated was more so like a composite of members. So you got people from all over, different bloodlines, different ideals coming together to form this one big mob with no true identity. Galvaroso being the head, he actually chose this name as a trick moniker to throw people off and hide his identity. Galvaroso was based off of Barbarossa, the Roman Emperor Frederick I. The reason why he took this inspiration is because he wanted to recreate the Holy Roman Empire in America, but on his own terms. And with the political power that he earned, the economical power that he earned, it was safe to say in the position that he's in, he definitely has done so. Even the FBI couldn't understand how he was able to make it so far. A lot of what he did is he would offer people a second chance. So you had mages that would lose wars with families, they lose all their money, they get driven out of their homeland, people who were criminals, of course, or even the people that some mages felt like were in the way. And Galvaroso is the person that extended his hand to these mages and said, hey, you come work for me, we have a good time, we rule the world. He welcomed them all in with open arms. He really didn't care about taking from them. All he wanted was for them to serve their purpose that he asked them to do. They become a part of the Scladio family, and you know, they get what they're looking for. And he's not the only group that's a part of the underworld. It goes into how there were many organizations that tried to do what he did, but they always had ulterior motives, and so the people would end up turning against him. But Galvaroso, all his people had respect for him. And that's the point where we come to now. With his political power, he himself had got the Scladio family into a part of the government. And in doing so, he was also a part of the plan of this fake Grail war that's being hosted in Strange Fate. He had the power to pick one mage that he can throw into the mix, and he knew exactly who to go for. So we switch over to some Mafia mages, and they're waiting on this man. They call him Mr. Cordelion. He had just been released from the correction center not too long ago. And in the moment of them having this conversation, the glass ceiling of the processing plant just shatters and a man just falls to the ground. And as he's falling, he's got two people, one in each hand, and he slammed them both into the ground as he fell from the roof, straight into the concrete floor. But they were still alive. They're coughing up blood, and the guy that was holding these gentlemen was, of course, Cordelion. The Mafia mages who were already present, these were supposed to be his subordinates. They make remarks about looking into the eyes of Cordelion. They said that calling him an emotionless killing machine would be generous, that his eyes were more so like looking at death itself. When it comes to his age, instead of giving an actual number, they just give a range. He's either in his late 30s or his early 40s, but still fit for the work regardless. So the guys that were having a conversation were about to ask him what's the deal, and then he just pulls out a pistol with the silencer and takes out both the guys that he landed with. What the Mafia mages that were already present had realized was that the guys that he took out were spies, pretending to be some of his subordinates. Cordelion doesn't tell them anything, he just tells them to clean them up. Then he tells them there's 36, 6 in here, 30 outside, get rid of them. And his subordinates are saying, well, where are they? They're all looking up at the ceiling trying to pinpoint the location. And in that moment, he shot all 4 men that were in front of him straight through the dome that were supposed supposed to be his subordinates. Turns out that they were rats too, pretending like they were looking along with him. He told them, come on man, be serious. This workshop belongs to the Scladios. There's no way you thought you could come in here with disguises like that. After he had done this, the corpses of these men that he had took out started to morph into a different shape, and all of them started to come for Cordelion at once, and he eliminated every single one of them. In just this opening, just this short amount of time, this man had taken out over 36 mages, hopped on the phone, and told his real subordinates to come clean it up. We got things to do. We get into a scene with Alcides going through the profile of Cordelion, his full name being Bosdelot Cordelion. The face that he wears out in the public is that he's a CEO of an industrial waste company, but behind closed doors, he's actually one of the mob bosses of the Scladio family. And you have Prelati getting excited just talking about him. She calls him Massacre Mage Bosdelot. And this is actually the part from the title where they're going through his profile, and it said that he's suspect in being involved in over 120 murder cases. And that's just the ones that they're aware of. And the reason that he was at the correction center is that they managed to put him down after getting him on a bunch of misdemeanors. But the correction center, which is the same center where Alcides has his hideout, that was just one of the facilities that Boz has been to. In the first prison that he went to, 29 people went missing, 3 guards and 26 of the prisoners. And before you know it, he had taken over the whole prison for the Scladio family. Luckily, they were able to cover this up. As far as his magecraft goes, Boz comes from a school that focuses on the art of domination, which is exactly like it sounds. It's a magecraft that allows you to dominate the forces inside yourself. And in doing so, you can actualize this as a greater power in reality. If you can pull this magecraft off correctly, then at times it can become even more valuable than just standard reinforcement. Also, it said that he knows Eastern folk magic, a type of magecraft that the clock tower finds disgusting. So his very nature would have the association against him. As a matter of fact, he got into it with one of the groups at the clock tower known as the Sponheim Abbey, and that was the point where he had finally entered the Scladios. They managed to pull him out the situation and gave him protection. Alcides points out that his background as a mage is as bad as it can get. The worst of the worst. He's suspected to have taken the life of several mages to the point where he specifically is being watched by the Department of Justice. So if Boz is supposed to be in prison, then how is he currently at the meat processing plant? It's simple. Prelati let him out of prison just to be in the war, of course. Who else could it have been? You gotta love her. So Alcides is telling her, I really don't think this is a good idea, bringing this dude into the war. There's no telling what can go wrong. We switch back over to Boz. We're back in his workshop basement. And right now, Boz has just summoned his servant, Heracles. So Herc is asking Boz the usual, are you my master? And Boz tells him, I don't know, you tell me. You'll have to decide whether or not I'm worthy. And though it may not seem like it, Herc is radiating this enormous amount of energy that's making all of Boz's subordinates just go into panic mode. Their magic circuits are trembling, they're breaking out into cold sweats. They knew he was the real deal. And Boz, on the other hand, didn't bat an eye, didn't even care. So when it comes to Herc, and this is Herc in his normal form, this is the first time a lot of people may have seen this. It's a lot like his original version in Stay Night. He's 2.5 meters tall, or in other words, he's 8 feet tall. Same hair, same tint of skin, but his body isn't physically enhanced like he was as a berserker. He's more slender. And they let it be known that his internal energy was so powerful that if all his subordinates tried to cast a large scale attack, a group magecraft attack on him together, it still wouldn't work. Could slaughter everybody in the room barehanded. And here you had Herc being as calm as all day now that he was back in his proper class, that being archer. So Boz starts to ask Herc a question in order to test his resolve and see how far he will go. The first thing that he asked him was that in order to win, would you be willing to take out a child? And Herc told him he could never do it. And anybody anybody who asked him to do it, they're beefing. That's his enemy. So Boz says, cool, that's all I needed to know. And he immediately used his first command spell to force Heracles into obedience. And in that moment, Heracles told him he was foolish. You could use 3 of them and try to make me take myself out 3 times. I got 12 lives. It's not gonna work. But in his mind, he was thinking just for trying to play with him on this level, he was gonna let Boz go ahead and waste his spells just to teach him a lesson. It tells us that his magical energy is top class, that it would take Age of Gods level magecraft to even begin to interfere with his mind. But there was something about Boz's command spell that was actually working. I gotta be honest, I need you to win by any means. He uses the second spell on Herc. He also forced him to remember his past. And immediately you have Herc go into a flashback. He's conversing with a blonde man that's telling him how great he was. And of course, we all know this is him with the Argonauts. He's talking to Jason. He flashed back to another scene. This time it was his wife telling him that he didn't do anything wrong. This, of course, being after the fact that he had taken the lives of his own children through the influence of Hera. He had no control over it. By this point, Herc couldn't believe it, but Boz was putting out energy with these spells that were on the level of Age of Gods witches from the time that he was in. He falls to his knees. He's finally starting to cave in. All of Boz's subordinates couldn't even believe what they were seeing. Considering Herc's power, this should have been over before it started. Yet Boz had been the one who turned the tables. And then finally, and yes, he went through with it, Boz used his third command spell to seal the deal. And that was when Herc realized this dude is dangerous. You telling me he used all 3 command spells at the beginning of the war at once? He's actually out of his mind. So being suppressed by this many command spells at once, most servants would have lost it, but Herc was still hanging in there. And now he was trying his best to reach out to Boz to take his life, but the mental aspect was starting to weigh too much on his spirit. He could never reach him. So after all the spells had been used, you had this creature come out of his cuffs. And then it goes back to a conversation that he had with Prelati, saying that even she couldn't control the servant he would summon with that catalyst. So Prelati is also the one that gave the catalyst for Herc. She says it would just take too much magical energy. Herc is another one of those expensive servants. And that wasn't the only thing that she gave him. Back in my video covering Prelati, I talked about how she actually witnessed and went to the site of the Fuyuki Grail War. And one of the things that she brought back was some of the Grail mud from the war. She actually gave some of this to Boz, saying that him and her are one of the only 2 people that can handle it and still keep their minds intact. Again, this was thanks to his domination magecraft. So that's exactly the creature that was now coming out of his cuff. Herc is steadily trying to release his energy to save himself. He knocked down more than half the barriers that surround the workshop with just this energy alone. And Boz started to use that same Eastern magecraft to apply this mud to Herc's body. And immediately Herc was getting consumed by it, saying that it reminded him of the Hydra poison that took his life. His entire body was coated with the mud, and it even changed his body structure. So instead of being 8 feet tall, he had shrunk down to 7 feet. His arms and his legs, which were toned, had lost their normal muscle definition, and all of his skin throughout his entire body was now painted reddish brown. And the spell that Boz used had become a part of Herc. It was a white scar that ran across his entire chest, as you can see in his design. The whole time Boz is like, are you finished fighting back now? Can we get started? And then he tells Boz, I will use you to get my revenge. And after that, I will twist your head off with my own hands myself. Nothing more, nothing less. And this would dawn the exact moment where Heracles had finally become Alcides, which was his original birth name. He took the pelt that he had on his shoulders, put it over his head, and tied it up to hide his face, saying that he never wants to look upon the works of man again, if he can help it. And he marks that he will not lift the pelt again until he uses the Grail to purge his real name, to cleanse himself of the impurities that the gods put him through. And while all of this is happening, you got Prelati watching this through her crystal ball, and she can't stop laughing. Just the idea of somebody living to go against the gods. And she makes a joke that Alcides and Jill would be really good friends, because if you follow followed the lore of FGO and things like that, you know that in Fate, he lived to do the same thing through Jalter. It's the same circumstance. As Faldeus continues to look into Boz's information, he realizes that the Scladio family are eventually going to become a problem. If things were to spiral out of control, even the full power of the White House altogether wouldn't be enough to go against this mob. They hold just that much authority. The Grail Mud itself is something that Galvaroso had a particular interest in. So what Prelati did is scavenge some of the mud, and she actually kept the mud inside of the entrails of humans and preserved it all the way up until this time, until 2009, where the war takes place. Out of all the people the mud had came in contact with, Boz was the only one who was able to keep his state of mind after the fact. And not only did he keep his state of mind, but he actually fused the mud with his own magical energy to increase the volume of it inside. He was using his domination magecraft to keep authority over the mud while keeping his sanity. He's real life moving like an EX berserker. And though it may sound simple, the act of him doing this is no easy task. And Faldeus points out that he must be going through all types of internal suffering to keep this afloat. And yet if you look at him, with him being consistently stoic and emotionless in his face, you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. You might as well say that he wasn't preserving his sanity. He had already been insane from the beginning. The mud couldn't do anything to harm him.